One of the hardest things I think for parents of teenagers and and parents of adults as well is that you have to come to terms with the fact that your children can't be wrapped in a bubble for their lives. I wish we all could. I mean, I wish we could all be spared from adversity that life brings to its relative context for people, and we can't. And sometimes the attempts to over control a child's environment, particularly in teenage and adult years, can actually lead to distance and resentment from the child toward the parent. At 16, I mean, that kind of thing is worth having some very open and honest discussions about. Sharing what you shared with me with her. Asking how you can be supportive. Respecting that there may be some autonomy that she's going to want. I mean, I don't know your daughter. I don't know the circumstances of the rape. I don't know the circumstances of kind of like the fallout and what's been going on with all of that. But as a parent, I really think one of the best things you can offer for a child, no matter what adversity they face, is to say, hey, I've got your back. I'm here if you need to talk about it. I'm not going to force it, but I do want you to know that I have your back, that I worry about the world, but I also respect that you do need to have some emerging autonomy, and that, no matter how much protecting you do, the thing is if you overprotect a child, if you overprotect a teenager, you actually work against them when they move out into the real world. Now, I'm not suggesting that everybody's going to get raped. Like, rape is, I mean, that fucking blows that happened to your daughter. Oh man, if there was anything I could take out of this world, that would be one of them. But overprotection is not going to do anybody any favors. Therapy can certainly be helpful. There are actually rape survivor advocacy programs, depending on where you live. When I worked at the Crisis Center as a undergrad, we actually had, it was an RSAP, Rape Survivor Advocacy Program, where you could actually have somebody to talk through. It wasn't like a therapist, but it was somebody who could advocate for you with like the police and stuff. And they would go on go with you for certain parts of that. They might help you find a therapist. Like, those types of things are available, depending on where you're at. But love and protection does not have to mean isolating your child from adversity. And an open and honest dialogue with her is going to be your best route. Also, I appreciate you sharing that in chat. That's a very heavy thing to have to share, and the vulnerability in that is not something I take for granted. I mean, just to go back to the parenting dynamic of teenagers, like, it's really hard because the teenage years are scary because your kids start to have additional autonomy. They're becoming adults. Now, teenagers tend to like to act like they are adults. They're not. Their brain's not there yet. But if you wrap your kids in bubble wrap, eventually the world's going to take the bubble wrap off. And if your kid's not prepared for that, it can make things really, really, really bad. Having a really adverse experience like that is not something that any of us, that's not like normalized adversity. That's not the kind of adversity I'm talking about in terms of like letting your kids experience it. It's going to be a process of sort of like healing from that. If you feel comfortable sharing your own experience with your kids, sometimes that can be helpful, but you also don't want it to take away from your kids' experience. Like, it's just a really tricky thing. And therapy is something that really can make a difference so long as it's talked about as not something that's being forced upon the kid, but more of like, hey, if you need some additional support, I'm willing to help you find somebody to talk to, especially if you don't feel comfortable talking to me. You do have to respect teenagers' emerging autonomy. Parents who refuse to do that run into a lot of resentment and problems later on. You have to let your kids go out and explore the environment. You have to let your kids experience adversity. You want to protect them from severe adversity, of course. But there's a control fallacy in parenting sometimes, where it seems like you have more control over your kids' lives than you actually do. The world is not, it's cruel in a lot of ways, and that doesn't make it okay. That's not an excuse for that. I hope whoever harmed your daughter sees justice, or I hope your daughter sees justice for that. Like, you do owe your kids some level of protection and resources and comfort and stuff, but like, you can't follow them around 24 hours a day. But I would say like neglect would be the opposite, Gappy. Like, you have some parents that are so over involved, and then you have parents that are just never available to their kids. They're the ones who are just like, figure it out, I'm not going to help you, and actually set rigid boundaries around assisting their kids in growing up. That's not generally great either. I can't even fathom being the parent of a child who was raped. I'd want to kill the person. Like, the thought's not doing it. The thought isn't killing the person. But like, when you see videos on the internet of like, parents who are in these trials for a person who assaulted their child, who, jump over the fence and run at him and try and kill him, or like try and hit him. Like, even the judges and law enforcement a lot of times in those scenarios understand why the person would want to do that. So wanting to protect your child in response to that is to be expected. It's the kind of response that shows you care. It's just very important being the parent in that moment. It's on you to regulate that and to not overdo it. And if you're having a hard time figuring out how to do that, really do encourage you to find a therapist. And I'm willing to help you do that if you need to. It really comes from a good place. I empathize very much with parents who want to protect their kids. It's an instinct. Of course you want to keep them safe. You're going to worry about them. I mean, my parents talk to me all the time about, even though I'm 31 years old, my parents still worry about me. That's okay. It's love. But my parents also, and many parents of adults who kind of move through the differentiation process with their kids, come to understand that when adversity hits, they can't get out in front of it. They can support me if it happens, right? Like, that's the other thing as a parent. It's sort of shift where you slowly shift your support, right? Like, you kind of, when your kids are little, you're preemptive. You're out there in the front. You're trying to prevent things from happening. But over time, that has to shift to where, instead of trying to be the preventative measure that stops adversity from happening in the first place, you become the support system for when adversity strikes, because adversity will inevitably strike. So if you let your kids know, hey, shit's going to go down. Like, something, I think I've shared this on stream before. My parents said this to me, and it was one of the most impactful things my parents could have ever said to me when I was a teenager. My dad said to me two things. He said, if you are ever in a situation that you want to get out of and you don't know what excuse to use, you blame me. He's like, if you need to slip out of the room and say I called and that I'm coming to get you, or that you're in trouble with me, he goes, I will be the bad guy anytime you need it to bail you out of any situation, whatever it is. I will come and get you out of it. I will not reprimand you. I will not get mad at you. You could be drunk. You could be in a really bad situation. If you call me to get out of it, I am not going to yell at you. I'm going to come get you and make sure you're safe. I remember my dad telling me that, and it had this very interesting effect where I didn't ever really want to get in trouble anyway. But knowing that my dad would do that and that I had my parents' support allowed me to set better boundaries with peers when I was in middle school and high school. And I used that many times to get out of situations that I didn't want to be in that were not great. Like, I remember one time a group of friends and I went to a park, and all of a sudden they pulled out alcohol and stuff and started drinking, and I didn't really want to do it. I didn't feel comfortable with it, and I didn't know how to get out of it. So I hit my dad with a quick text and was like, call me. He called me, and I was like, oh shit. And like, he answered, he's like, what's up? I was like, oh my God. I was like, really? Like, do I really have to leave right now? Like, why are you calling me? And then he kind of understood what was going on, and he came and got me, bailed me out. And never got it mad at me for it. So, and the other thing that my dad said is that if I ever went to jail, if something bad ever really happened and I had to go like stay in like jail overnight or something like that, my dad was like, I will bail you out one time. No questions asked. I'll bail you out. You ever do it again after that, your ass is sitting in there for however long you have to sit in there. But he's like, I will bail you out one time. And I never really wanted to let him down. And so I guess I say that as an illustrative point of like, that's that shifting of support. You have to understand that stuff is going to happen outside of your control, and that if you can really beef up the idea that your kid has internally, that you will support them, that they can come to you with adversity. Because that's the other thing, is overprotective parents have a tendency to get really reactive when their kids approach them and say like, oh, I was at a party and there was weed there or something like that, and parents flip out. All that does is teach your kid that you are not approachable with that stuff. And then your kid's off to fend for themselves in a way that maybe they were looking for support when they tried to bring it up. So if you're a parent, don't freak out when your kids talk to you about adversity and they talk to you about bad stuff, because that shows that they trust you. You can talk about consequences. You can talk about your expectations. You can do those things, but do not freak out at your children when they talk about stuff like that, because all you're going to reinforce, they're still going to go do that stuff. And now they're not going to come talk to you about it. That's something that my wife and I, when we work with teenagers, have to deal with all the time when working with parents. You want to be, as a parent, the person that your kids will turn to when adversity strikes. And you have to show that through action.
Don't forget to talk about the other side of parents who need to hold those boundaries.
Oh, yeah. Like, you can't just, like, let everything go. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, like you know, your dad said you get one time, and then after that, I'm not getting you out. But you know, you have to be that parent who, like, when that second time comes,
Will
you
bail.
can't fucking get him out.
Yep, that's exactly right. Like thank you for saying that. Yeah, like and my dad would. Like I remember also. I mean, there's a time. I know I'm using my parents as an example, but it's my lived experience, so it's the easiest way I can do this. My dad told me a rule when I was growing up was do not play golf in the backyard with hard golf balls. You can use wiffle balls, but do not hit hard golf balls. So what do I do? Okay, so I got a friend who, was a little bit more loosey-goosey. We're in his backyard. We're playing golf with hard golf balls. What do? I break the window. Literally put a golf ball right through his kitchen window. So my dad finds out, obviously, because my neighbor's mom comes over and says, hey, Ryan and Tim were playing golf in the backyard. He broke my kitchen window. It's cool, but just thought you should know. So my dad, he's like, well, I told you not to do that. He's like, but I understand that you were, mistakes happen. That's what peer pressure is. You succumb to peer pressure. So my dad gave me a choice of what I was going to be grounded from. But the worst thing that I had to do, the thing that stuck out to me and still to this day I remember, is my dad said, you have to go over to Tim's house and you have to apologize to his parents and you have to offer to pay for the window. And I mean, he had already worked it out with my friend's parents. They had homeowners insurance. My dad was going to cover. It was fine. But he wanted me to go take accountability for that, and he forced me to do it. I remember I so badly didn't want to do it. He's like, nope, get your ass outside, walk down the driveway, go to their house. You will ring their doorbell, and you will apologize, and you will do that. And I did it, and I hated every second of it. But that was a punishment in and of itself. All right. So that was pretty lenient. Honestly, because I think my dad, I was grounded from going fishing for a week because at that time my dad and I used to go fishing a lot. It was like big deal, right? So, but second time, I'm in my yard again and I'm with another friend, and yours truly decides I'm gonna play with hard golf balls again.
What is your deal?
Well, I was a dummy, so. We're playing with hard golf balls again, and I'm thinking, I can do this. I'm better at golf now. I can do this. I can get away with this. What do? I hit a shot, literally hits the brake on my friend's bike and knocks the brake in off the handlebar and breaks his bike. So the kid's name was Dan. So Dan's not happy about it, obviously. My grandma comes outside because my grandma used to watch us. My grandma comes outside. My grandma goes, get your ass inside. I'm like, oh shit. She's like, your dad's coming home for lunch and you're gonna tell him what you did. I'm like, oh no, oh my god. So my grandma's like, yep, get your ass in your room. So I go in the room, I'm laying in my bed, I'm like freaking out because I know my dad's gonna come home for lunch. And I'm like, oh no, he's gonna know. My dad comes into my room, and if he was here, if I get my parents on stream in April, you guys will have to ask him about this because he's always told me that this was one of the hardest moments he's ever had parenting. He said to me, he goes, all right, well, you did it again. Like, yeah. He's like, okay, well, I can already see you're beating yourself up, but here's the deal. You are going to pay for the bike this time. Also, you are grounded until we go to Arizona. We had a trip to Arizona planned. And that Arizona trip is in 3 weeks. He goes, you are grounded. You will stay inside. You will not have your Nintendo 64 for those 3 weeks. You will not have your Game Boy. I told you last time that you were going to go on full lockdown if you ever did this again. And he followed through with it. My dad says that was the most painful conversation he ever had to have with me because he didn't want to do it. But he did it. And I never got grounded after that. I never messed with it because I sat so I got 2.5 weeks. My parents let me off for good behavior because I was good through the grounding. So my dad was like, all right, you can have a couple extra days because you were good, which was cool. But I knew my dad meant business. So what Jared said there is so super important is you do also have to have consequences. If you continue to let your children get away with things and you break your boundaries, your kids learn that they can do whatever they want and that you're going to break your boundaries. It's excruciatingly difficult as a parent, to have your kids spend the night in jail if they do something stupid. That is ridiculously hard because you want them to be safe. You don't want them to experience that. But one of the best things you can do as a parent, if you told them that was something that was going to happen, is follow through with that. So many parents get tripped up with children having bad behaviors because they themselves do not hold their boundaries. They do not set the boundaries. Their kid gets distressed when they hold the boundary, and then they break. All that does is it shows your kid, if they push you hard enough, you will break your boundaries. You cannot show them that. Can I ask what your stance on using something like removing a bedroom door as a punishment? I have my own thoughts on it, but curious to know what someone with a background in human development might say. For a teenager, I think it's a really stupid punishment. You are not helping your cause. The thing you have to remember as a parent of a teenager is everything you do does not just have consequences on your kid. It has consequences for the relationship you have with your kid. You yank the doors off of a teenager's bedroom, and you are showing them that you don't trust them, that you are not facilitating their autonomy. And sometimes, like as adults, we can think about how that might send a message, but teenagers don't think abstractly enough to understand that punishment in context. I am not a big fan of that type of punishment. I am a fan of very clear expectations, very clear consequences, and direct communication with kids. And building, you want to be seen as, again, as a support system, not as somebody that's going to make things worse when adversity strikes. Like if you teach your kids how to treat you, and you do that by how you treat them, and you wouldn't do that to an adult. You certainly it's just such a way to treat a kid. Like I can't ever foresee a circumstance where taking the doors off of a teenager's room is going to do you any favors. I really don't.
Chances are, if you're using that type of punishment for something, then you probably need to do something maybe more severe. Like maybe that's what you're talking about, removing the kid from the home because it's just not a safe place for the kid or something like that.
Yeah.
If you're at the point where you have to remove the doors from a teenager's room, and I say have to and purposefully, then you might be at a point where you need outside help with parenting.
I would argue you are at that point, probably. And if that's your go-to, like if that's your first line, you really got to reevaluate your consequences. So true. Too many parents do not realize the fact that they are not owed unconditional respect by anyone, even their own children. Oh man, D.L. Miller, I talk about that all the damn time. Your kids don't owe you love. They don't owe you respect. They don't owe you anything. You owe it to them. You chose to have them there. They did not choose to be here. You have to earn the respect of your kids in the same way that they have to earn yours. Like your kids don't owe you anything. I know I get really adamant and soapboxy about that, but I cannot emphasize that enough. I wish parents could hear that and internalize it before they have kids, because a kid doesn't owe you anything. If you use the excuse of, well, I provide shelter and food and I do all these things for you. Yeah, you're a parent. That's what you're supposed to do. That's your job. So that's not good enough for getting your kids respect. That is what you have to do. You have to keep your kids alive. They're on the grid. I disagree with removing a kid from a home. My reason being, sometimes it's not acting out, but serious mental health issue. If it's not a mental health issue, then it could be that the family needs help. But if you're going to remove the child or kids from the home, it could lead up to more issues for the kid. Here's the thing to understand about that, Tavarian, and to everybody else here. Removing a child from the home is the very last thing that ever happens.
Yeah.
Like, there is such a mythos, and this is because of how poorly represented Child Protective Services are, that Child Protective Services is going to take your kids away right away. No. If anything, Child Protective Services takes too long to remove kids out of the home.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Kids getting removed from the home is absolutely the last thing the state wants to do. It costs them a lot of money, a lot of resources. They know that it causes issues for the kid. If a kid is removed from a home, it is because the kid needs to be removed from the home. That stuff does not happen on the first drop. Like Jared, I'm sure Jared has had this experience as a therapist. I certainly have. And as a supervisor, where I have seen cases where it blew my mind that the kid wasn't removed from the home earlier than they were.
Oh yeah.
So
I've made so many reports that I was like, oh crap, this is gonna suck. Something big is gonna come from this. The kid's gonna get removed from the home, and nope.
Sometimes they won't even investigate.
Yeah, sometimes they straight up just won't even investigate, and you're just like, how?
Where does privacy become an issue with a child where the child is self-harming from something outside the family or home? I mean, now we're getting into like very specific questions, right? Like a child who's self-harming is coping with something, and taking their privacy away is not addressing the issue. Like, if you take the doors off of a kid who's cutting themselves, they're just gonna find somewhere else to cut. That's not how it works. Like, you have to get at the root of what is this person coping from and helping them find alternative coping strategies. Again, the underlying point that I want to make in this conversation is that as a parent, the number one priority that you should have, other than meeting the needs of your child, as the parent of a teenager or a young adult, but I mean also as a child, but more importantly in teenage and young adult years, is you want to show up in the relationship with your child in a way that shows your child, not just pays lip service to, shows your child that you are reliable and that you are supportive and that you also have very clear expectations that you will follow through on consequences for. That is your goal as a parent of a teenager, because they are going to have things that happen to them. They're going to do dumb shit. That is what being a teenager is. They do not have the experience that you have as a parent of the world. They have only been around for teen amount of years. So they have to learn. If they know that you are supportive, that you have got their back, but that you will also mean business if it comes down to it. Like my dad used to say, if you make me choose between friend and dad, I will be your dad every single time. Like, that type of thing is what you want. You want your kids to approach you in adversity, not run from you or fear you or avoid you. I mean, I welcome. That's my TED Talk. I mean, I really cannot emphasize that enough. I have seen firsthand almost 9 years of doing therapy at this point. My wife would attest to it if she was sitting here right now. Jared can attest to it. Any therapist, I could bring any systemic therapist into this room right now, and they're going to tell you the exact same thing. That is the thing that is going to prevent your kid from doing dumb shit and is going to make it easier to navigate adversity that comes with teenage years. Boosting a message from Cammie. Any advice on how to manage different parenting between partners? Say dad is more of the take the doors off. Mom is more of establishing trust with the child. You have to talk about it. Hopefully before you have kids. Differences in parenting style doesn't mean a person has to be locked into that parenting style. Parenting is a joint endeavor so long as both parents are involved. And that means that the parents have to communicate. Don't make your parental differences and issues your kid's problem. Like, if your kid because your kids are going to feel it. Like, they will feel the differences. They will learn how to navigate that. Sometimes in ways that you don't want them to. Best thing you can do as a parental unit is be on the same page. Come to an actual determination of your expectations and how things will happen. And if you're thinking to yourself, oh my God, that feels like a lot of work. It is, but you got to do it. You owe it to your kids to do that. Parenting's hard, man. It's hard. I understand that. Like, I'm not a parent. I never will be. But I do understand that parenting's not easy. Nobody gives you the manual. A lot of the answers that I give, by the way, if you want some insight into where these come from, aside from just like personal experience and professional experience,
hey, relax.
where a lot of this comes
Making
from
this look a little
is
too
understanding child and human development. Like, if you understand developmentally what humans are capable of at various parts of their lives and how reinforcement can affect that development, it gives you answers for a lot of these things.
Welcome
So if you're
aboard.
sitting here going like, how the hell can he answer all these questions about this stuff? I am drawing upon what I know of human development, trying to operationalize that for y'all. Think about that. Who are the people you most trust in your life? And why do you trust them? Who did you trust most as a teenager, and why did you trust them? Be that. I'm curious. Do you get a lot of pushback because of not having kids, therefore you don't know what it's like, even though you have all this experience and knowledge? Not really, Zuki. I mean, it happens. I mean, who's this 31-year-old kid who, looks like he's 18, who doesn't have kids, telling me how to raise kids? But the thing is, like, what I'm talking about, you don't have to be a parent to understand. Like, all you have to do is be a person who knows how to interact with humans to really understand this stuff. So having development, like, rarely do I get pushback, only because I'm usually pretty confident in the way that I share my expertise, but I also don't like force it on people. Like, I mean, I can't force a parent to do something. I can only be there to tell them what I know and what I think they might consider. Generally, I can override that if people give me a chance, and then I help them do a thing that actually creates the difference they want. And then they go, oh shit, okay, maybe he is on something. But no, I don't get it as often as you might think. Did you ever get much resistance for that, Jared, when you were doing therapy?
I admittedly did not work with a lot of parents, but I I got a decent amount of initial pushback with married couples when they knew that I wasn't married, but it was quickly dissolved by just me talking to them, and they're like, okay, never mind, he knows what he's doing. But yeah, a lot of people, whenever they were coming as a couple and we're having problems, would be like, there's no ring on your finger, what the hell do you know? And be like, well, let me show you.
Yep. I will say it's weird to me that as an adult, my dad now calls and wants to talk more than he ever did before. I appreciate it, but I feel that there's an underlying reason he reaches out so often. Is there a way to bring it up without him feeling like I don't want him to do it? Guys, this is not an indictment on you, Floaty. You guys, I cannot emphasize this enough. You cannot control how other people feel when you bring things up. You can't do that. It's impossible. You cannot control the responses that other people are going to give to you. The only person that you can control at any given point in time is yourself and your boundaries and how you show up to things. You do your best. You bring it up calmly, warmly, directly, openly, honestly, but you cannot control how that is going to affect somebody. If you put your focus there, it takes the focus away from what you need to focus on, which is how you're going to show up, what you're going to say, and what your boundaries are going to be, and what your response is going to be to that person if they respond to it in certain ways. You cannot control that. You just can't.
Also, there's a pretty easy way to bring that up if you needed it. And she'd be like, hey, thanks for reaching out so much. I've appreciated talking to you. Any reason why? Or is it just, decided to talk more? And it's not that awkward. That's no, that is not awkward. Not that awkward. Not awkward. Also, you're an adult. Parents can connect with their kids as adults in significantly different ways than they could as they were kids. So that's another reason why people see either an increase or a different type of relationship that they have with their parents as adults.
Yeah, my parents and I talk about a lot of different things than we used to talk about when I was a kid.
Yeah.
We talk about debt and mortgages and shit like that. But know your boundaries. I certainly, and I don't know, Jared, if you've ever had this experience, and you're welcome to share or not share if you have. Like I've had to set boundaries with my parents sometimes when they talk about their relationship. Like sometimes like one of my parents might say something about the other parent. I'm like, hey, that's between you and the other parent. Like, I don't really need to hear that. Because the thing you have to remember is like, even though they're your husband or wife, they're my parent. So I'm kind of biased in this conversation. So like, I don't really want to go there. It's okay to have those boundaries with your parents as an adult.
I haven't had to set boundaries, but as I'm sure you're aware, there are certain boundaries that I have had to push through because like I'm an adult now and these are things that I need to know about my parents, Yep.
I don't think anyone has to worry when someone gives their opinion on how to raise children when they don't have kids themselves, because everybody's been a child at some point. Right. And here's the other thing. Even if I had kids, how do you know whether I'm a good parent? Like, there are plenty of therapists. Like, I know of therapists that have a litany of issues as parents that work with parents and do a good job. So just because you have kids doesn't mean, and I also know therapists who are good parents that aren't great at working with parents. Like us having personal experience with kids that really doesn't have as much of a value add as people tend to think. In the same way that when Jared was talking about not being married and doing couples therapy, like we have the conceptual knowledge. We went to school for this stuff. I didn't just walk in off the street and go like, hey man, I'm a relationship expert. I know human development. I grew up. I know how that works. I didn't do that. I went to school for 9 years for this shit.
I've also known relationship therapists who I would argue are terrible relationships for some of the most brilliant relationship therapists I've ever met in my entire life.
Yeah, some of the best hitting coaches in baseball can't hit a baseball. Would you say a parent venting constantly to their child could be unintentionally manipulative? Yes. Sometimes it's intentionally manipulative.
Oh, yeah.
I used to feel lucky to have what I thought was a really open dynamic with my mom, but at 21, I'm realizing that her venting to me so much about family members, work, etc. over so many years, I know more about how she works than she does about me, so it doesn't go both ways. I feel she'd benefit from therapy, but I don't know if it's really my place to suggest it. Sure it is. I mean, you can suggest it. Doesn't mean she has to do it. You can also talk about how you've been affected by that dynamic, probably, Ghost. But yeah, that is 100% what can happen. And some parents, many parents do that. It's one thing to talk about those things with your children when they're adults, because your children are capable of setting boundaries and kind of trying to decide for themselves whether that's the kind of thing they want to talk to their parents about. But as a kid, there's a power dynamic there that you can't really escape, and that's not great.